Scientists are experimenting with a mutant COVID-19 strain that reportedly has a 100% kill streak in mice. The new strain is called GXP2V, and it attacks the brains of mice engineered to reflect similar genetic makeup to humans. With most mice living just 8 days after being infected with this virus, researchers report the mice lost weight, became sluggish, adopted a hunched posture, with their eyes turning completely white the day before they died. Now, this experiment, of course, brings back haunting memories from the 2020 pandemic. Let's bring in senior national correspondent Brian Endon, who is following the story, joins us live. Brian, the obvious question here, could this affect humans in the same way?
Well, we have to wait to find out that part of this. We've been looking over this research all day, Nicole, and obviously, like you said, anytime you hear about China doing some kind of COVID research, it does send off alarm bells, when you think back to the way the whole pandemic may have started. So there is some reason to be concerned about this. And you mentioned some of the symptoms that these mice in this lab in China have after they were tested with this new strain of COVID. Lost weight, sluggish, eyes turned white. Again, though, for us, I think the biggest concern is what kind of research are they doing, and is there the possibility of another lab leak? Could that be a problem here? We spoke to an infectious disease doctor at Florida International University. She says it's too soon to be alarmed, that it's possible this research could end up being good, could actually help prevent COVID in the future. This is what she had to say.
The studies themselves are, especially if they are well done and well contained in appropriate laboratories, are very useful for helping us get ahead of natural changes such that we can produce appropriate monoclonal antibodies, appropriate different types of enzyme inhibitors like protease inhibitors that can help us, again, get ahead and even produce better vaccines ahead of time before there's a major problem if it happens spontaneously.
And you heard the doctor there, Nicole, say if it's in an appropriate laboratory. I think that's the big question here. What kind of protocols are they taking in this lab? Should there be concern that it could possibly lead to some kind of leak? We don't know the answers to those questions yet. One of the big questions, though, has been about humanized mice. You mentioned that in your introduction. A lot of people I'd never heard of a humanized mouse. Basically, they're mice that are bred, so their immune system is similar to humans. But the doctor we spoke with emphasized that there are still some major differences.
But it's important to realize that they're still mice. And how a particular virus affects a mouse doesn't necessarily, even a humanized mouse, doesn't mean it's still a mouse, it's not going to necessarily reflect what's going to happen in a human.
Dr. Marty, who you heard from there from Florida International University, she says she was actually on a special team with United Nations that would go into laboratories around the world and make sure that they're following protocols and not doing anything dangerous. And she said based on what she knows with this situation in China, which we don't know a ton about, but based on the little information that we do have, she says she hopes that one of these teams will go in there and make sure that everything is being done safely. Because again, when you hear China and you hear COVID and you hear mice and you hear new testing, it obviously gets a lot of people worried, Nicole.
Yes, it does. All right, Brian Endon, thank you. Let's bring in Dr. Kristen England, infectious disease doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. Dr. England, thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, a lot to potentially be concerned about here. I'd like to start with one thing that really stuck out. The study's reporting that 100% mortality rate in mice. How significant is that?
I will tell you that rarely do you find studies that are truly 100%. You look at the number of mice that they used. Initially, they used 4 mice, then they used 8 mice that were infected. So we're talking about, first off, 12 mice. That's a really small number. Next, I want to tell you that this is a preprint article, which means it has not been peer-reviewed. So there's a lot that still could be flawed in the way that they conducted the studies and the way that they're reporting the studies. Simple things like reporting that the mice, that their eyes turned white, to me sounds very kind of horror film-esque. We don't usually make that kind of a statement in a scientific paper where there would be much more detail about that. So I've got a lot of questions about the validity of this test, or of this report. But I do think it's certainly important that we do listen to a lot of the data coming out of China, because they do a lot of testing on coronaviruses.
You know, and you called it a preprint article. And so maybe my first question should have been to you, after reading this, how concerned were you as a physician, as a doctor?
I really wasn't, to be honest with you, in doing some research and looking at this specific virus. It has been tested before, and it has been tested on mice, and it was a variant of a coronavirus that's in basically a Southeast Asian anteater. And they've been looking at it to try and see if they can use this virus mutant or variant to try and make vaccines. So it's not necessarily a new virus that I'm reading. What I'm reading is that they modified these mice pretty significantly and put a lot of receptors so that they have a lot of these ACE receptors. And over the years, we've heard about ACE receptors, and that's what COVID likes to latch onto to get into the cells. We don't have a lot of those in our brain. There's some on the neurons in the brain, but they've modified these mice to have a lot of these receptors in there. So it's really not human-like. And they even admitted in their paper that the company that had produced these mice haven't put out a lot of any significant reports about what these mice are comparable to.
Okay, well, I think that is certainly a bit reassuring there. But we saw what happened back in 2020. I think, you know, in 2019, you would have asked any of us, we would have never imagined, you know, what our lives would look like. How concerned should we be?
Well, I think these groups of viruses, these coronaviruses, do mutate or get variants fairly rapidly. And as was mentioned earlier by one of our colleagues in Florida, you know, we do want to make sure that we know what variants are out there and what's being done in laboratories. And they should be very transparent about what they're doing, because we need to make sure we understand, you know, what's the potential for getting out into the communities. But, you know, I think we always need to be aware, and there needs to be great news like you're providing here, and at least making us aware of what's out there. But this is certainly not a cause to panic.
Okay, and you said, you know, these studies take place because it is about developing vaccines. We obviously want to be able to protect ourselves. But I think another big question, is there a possibility this strain, you know, regardless of the mice really mimic humans or not, is there the possibility the strain could somehow be leaked?
You know, if this strain is leaked, at least the initial studies that they looked at when they were looking at this virus and trying to make vaccines, those mice did not get ill. And again, we're not mice, so I think there are certainly the potential for variants to develop anywhere in the world, just naturally develop, that could be more dangerous than the ones that we currently have. But nothing that I see right now is particularly concerning.
All right, no need to panic. All right, Dr. Kristen England, thank you so much for your time.
Sure thing.
But right now, the White House press briefing